the major universities are addressing this interdisciplinary aspect in one way or another as well too. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually a postgrad student in psychology for music, and that's something we don't have here in Singapore. One thing that I noticed was that in our research was a lot more about social biology, basically, so a lot of psychology studies on qualitative studies and quantitative studies, actually, just asking for feedback. How much is that relevant to the new movement of cognitive science? In terms of, is it better to be more involved in neurobiology? Is that going to be the overarching theme, do you think? Would that be more important?
I think the answer is that none of these areas is ever going to eclipse any of the others. It depends on the questions that you're most interested in asking. Science ultimately is about capturing generalizations. And there are fascinating generalizations that exist at the behavioral level that will never be able to be explained at the neurobiological level. There are fascinating generalizations that exist at the neurobiological level that you could never capture with psychology. It really is a question about the questions that appeal to you. Even neurobiological generations are not going to be captured in terms of the movement of the subatomic particles that make up the neurons. Going lower in the hierarchy of explanation does not necessarily help you answer questions better. It depends. You want to address questions at the level at which you're going to get answers to those generalizations. So it is neither the case that the future is going to be neurobiology or that the future is going to be psychology. The future is definitely going to be both, depending on the questions that you're asking. And the reason it's going to be both is that there are deep, important generalizations about who and what we are that exist at all of these different levels.
And so it becomes a choice about what you want to do. And in that regard, people always ask me, should I be a molecular neurobiologist, or should I be a systems neurobiologist, or should I be, a cognitive neurobiologist, if there's a difference there? And my answer is very simple. My answer is that the choice to be a scientist is the choice of a lifestyle. It's not a job. It's a hobby. It's something you do for your life. And so the single most important choice you're going to make is something that you passionately want to do, a question that you passionately want to work on for a long time, solving it at different levels. And so to my mind, it's not a question of, for you or any of you, about which is the right field for any objective reason. It's a question of which is the right field for your passion, so that you can really feel involved and passionate about what you're doing.
We have one question over here first, and then we'll bring it down here. Yes.
Good afternoon, professors. I would like to direct this question to Dr. Lim. Extending your previous You were talking about the Asian paradigm and how you as an Asian, it felt so different being a professor, and you had conflicting interests, right? So I would like to ask, are there any paradigms that we as Asians should deem less important to make our way in the modern world?
That should be simple to answer in a sentence or two. No. Wow. I think it's important to be aware that as an Asian, you have been imprinted with a certain cultural predisposition to think a certain way, to act a certain way, to make certain decisions. And those stereotypes may not apply to everybody, but there's a fairly strong prevailing current towards being conservative in your thinking and to want to satisfy certain requirements and to not challenge authority. And these things are, I think, very deeply ingrained and very hard to rebel against, because it's not even in your nature to want to be rebellious. To me, the tension is that what we really want in life, I think all of us, is we want to be happy. And we all define that subjectively, individually, and it's very hard to know how to quantify your own happiness when it doesn't necessarily go in line with certain rubrics that have been put in front of you, or what certain, parental, schooling, other kind of advice that you've been given. I say advice loosely, that you've been given that you should do this or that in order to achieve a certain type of lifestyle. When in the end, your goal may not be achievement; it may be happiness. And these things, I think, are very much at odds with one another. So I guess if I had to say any advice, is that I'll just give you my own personal view. You only have one life to live, and it's very short. And so from that perspective, I don't want to waste even a single moment doing something that is contrary to my own true nature. That might put you in a difficult position to live that way all the time. And I don't even know if it's possible in Singapore to always live that way. But I think it's helpful to at least try to live that way occasionally. And with regards to the big decisions in life, I think that you're headed for potential misery if you make a big decision in your life based on something that your heart's not into. I truly believe that, and I realize it's fraught with complications to say that, but I deeply believe it.
Can I pick up on just one little phrase that Charles said? As someone who has worked in the U.S. With students from several Asian countries, one of the phrases that you mentioned was something about respect for authority. Respect for authority has both much less of a place in the U.S. Compared to many Asian countries. It has much less of a place in science, and I'm inclined to say that that's one of the only situations where there might be a normative component there. I think respect for authority has very little place and very little good to offer in science. That's one thing just to be aware of. I'll just share the anecdote that the first student who had been educated completely in Asia, that was a graduate student in my laboratory, I eventually, after a couple of weeks, said, I demand that in every meeting we have, you disagree with me at least twice.
And stop calling me sir.
Can I ask why you asked that question?
We are in Singapore, and this is a mainly Asian audience, and among the professors in the panel, there are 3 non-Asians and 1 who is... Okay, actually, majority of you are...
Who are you calling non-Asian? Oh.
Wait, okay, see, this is one of my... but I... Yeah, thank you, professors, for your response too. But do you still want me to answer?
No, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable at all. I actually really want to understand what's driving your question.
I think from my personal viewpoint, a lot of the science that's going around in the world is very much focused on while you may see an occasional Chang or a Ho, then majority of the names you see on posters everywhere are English names, which is to say they are English educated, perhaps from the... I may be wrong. I understand that this is my own biased perspective, but I just want to broaden my perspective as an Asian to see what the other side of the world think of Asians and what we should think of them, if you get what I mean.
I think we want to disagree with one of the things you said.
Right.
And our impression is in the United States that every other name you see on posters is Asian. We see the Asian talent. I'm trying to choose words carefully here. We see the immense potential of the Asian academic communities as a sleeping giant that in due course, maybe very soon, is going to take over the scientific enterprise in the world. We see the standard, and pardon me, I mean, you're talking about Asians. We see the standard model of the white American laboratory as dominant, as a model that has a short life. And I think you agree with me, right, Liz?
No, I haven't agreed with you about anything today.
And we barely know each other.
Wait. I do agree that if there was ever a model of science as being a kind of white or American enterprise, its days are numbered, and that's a very good thing. But I don't actually see the future of science as moving from one group's domain to another group's domain. I mean, one of the things that I think is wonderful about science, even now and becoming more so, is that it's so international, and that people, and partly for technical reasons with the internet and everything, it's rather easy for people to collaborate intimately with each other on opposite sides of the globe. And actually, this was a seventh thing I could have added that I love about cognitive science, though I'm sure it's true about every other area of science as well. It's not only a way of coming in contact with people from many different disciplines, but also a way of coming in contact with people from many different backgrounds and getting to know them in some cases better than you know many of the people you know from your own background, but who are doing other things. So I see the future of science as being international and not tied to any one community. That said, I completely agree that everywhere we turn, we see this enormous increase in both the numbers of Asian scientists, the quality of the work that's being done, quality of the institutions. I mean, obviously, I don't need even to say that here. It's so glaringly obvious.
I'm going to ask one more comment from Bernard Lansky here.
Mine was just a highly provocative point in support of the questioner behind, and in a context where I obviously live in this community. And it is that actually, while the Asian names are appearing, one of the things we recognize in Singapore as an example is the citation indices tend to be towards still European and American institutions. So those Asian names may be getting published in American universities or in British journals or whatever. And it's actually, at this stage, and this is obviously possibly a trend to move, but it's possible just to raise an awareness that there is a certain truth, that it's currently much more difficult to get published from in Asia, statistically, than it is to get published yet from other communities. I'm sure it's going to change just as the nature of the surnames have changed in the last 10 to 15 years. But there's a point to be made that I think is really worth taking away from here. It came as a great surprise to me. It's one of this university, as an example, is ranking quite highly in international things and so on. One of the things that pulls it down is actually its relative citation values, purely because people won't look towards the East, let's say, as we tend to call it, when one is looking for one's background material. It's changing. I'm not saying it's not, but just to be aware of it. Yeah.
Thank you for
It
that
ended up
really
being a question.
interesting...
Sorry, I was going to ask it as a question. I did have one question, just so that I did think legitimate.
Last
Do you think
question
you'll
of
ever
the
be
day.
Department of Cognitive Arts?
Well, can you say that again?
Thank you.
So the question is, do you think there will ever be a Department of Cognitive Arts?
I mean, cognitive science as an approach encompasses the arts. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work in music cognition and in cognition in the visual arts. Are you talking about a program that would that would not be coming from a scientific perspective? That is to say, is the arts the subject of cognitive science, or are you proposing a different way of studying?
It could be a slightly different paradigm shift that maybe happen at some point, which is that having done a lot of analysis in a particular direction, to try and look at something that's more global and intuitive, taking that analysis of the starting point, right, and being more emergent to form that knowledge base. I don't know, but it's just that
I mean, so cognitive science is unified as the project of answering a certain type of question. It's a question about how the mind works, and that encompasses questions about how the mind works when it comes to music and art and food and love and everything. typically the arts have not been, at least not been only, about trying to understand how something works.